Good afternoon, folks, and welcome back to our podcast, The Bench. And today's guest is Martin and Johnny, who will both introduce themselves. Martin.
Hi, great to be here, Hugh. So my name's Martin Canavan, and I'm the Head of Policy and Participation at Aberlour Children's Charity.
Brilliant.
And is it Hugh, or can I still call you Shug?
Shug, still call me Shug.
There. Right, Shug, I'm Johnny Hendry, I'm a youth worker with Aberlour.
Brilliant, mate, brilliant. And thanks to both of you today for giving up your time and coming to the bench. I've already explained to you the significance of the location. And music, tunes, tells you a lot about somebody. What kind of tunes reminds you of your childhood?
In my childhood?
Childhood, emotions, what kind of music?
Well, I kind of thought, when you asked me that, I kind of thought, well, I'll put it towards something that means something to me with the time I've been working with young people,
right.
Particularly around the club, the club setting. And 3 songs came up for me. Was basically the Michael Bolton, When I'm Back on My Feet Again.
Right.
And obviously there's a lot of reasons behind that.
Sure. When
I'm Back on My Feet Again, if you listen to the song, it's a lot of meaning in it. Particularly through people who have went through maybe addiction, just basically a bad time in their life.
Aye.
And a bit of support to get them back on their feet, really, at the end of the day. Stand By Me was another one. For me, I think everybody in life needs somebody.
Yep.
Everybody needs somebody alongside them. And last was If I Can Dream by the man himself, Elvis. And to me, that's very significant. It's, you know, to me, it's the world we're living in at the moment. I think there's over 1 billion children not getting any access to food,
sure,
water, you know, education. 1 billion children still.
The numbers are frightening. Still
in this lifetime. That's what we've got, you know. So it would be a dream if we just eradicated the whole lot of that.
Totally.
You know, but it is a dream, you know.
Dreams can come true. Dreams can come true.
We can always dream, you know. So that's my 3 anyway. That's
brilliant. 3 good tunes, Johnny.
Well, I think the meaning behind them, I think, is relevant. You know,
aye, definitely, mate. And yourself, Martin?
So when we had this conversation, you were asking us to think about tunes that remind you of your childhood. Well, the very first song that comes to mind for me is Yellow Submarine.
Yellow Submarine, wow.
So the Beatles were in my house all the time. My mum and dad had the old records, we listened to them loads. But I have a particular vivid memory when I think I was maybe primary 2 or primary 3, and we learned the song in school, and the teacher helped us learn the words, and we sang it. I think we might have performed it as well, maybe at a school concert or something. And it was just one of those songs that just stuck with me, and it's a very childlike song, obviously, but it's I can't help think of it. I can't help hear it without thinking.
What one of the Beatles wrote that again?
Paul McCartney.
Was that
Ringo sings it?
Was it Ringo sings it?
But Paul McCartney
wrote it.
It's a very childlike song, and it's obviously it makes you think about childhood anyway. But for me, it's got a very deep resonance about my own childhood and very young childhood. And then I childhood in the 90s. I grew up as a teenager in the 90s, so kind of Oasis and all that type of stuff was my bag. And one of their songs in particular, Whatever, I always just thought was a really kind of go out there and I'm free to do whatever I want, and I can get out there and I've got, you know, life's ahead of me. So that's always a song I've come back to over the years. And ever since I was wee, and all the way throughout my life, a song that has always just stuck with me and I come back to all the time is 3 Little Birds by Bob Marley. And I think it's just a song, it's a song about optimism, you know? It's just, don't worry about a thing, everything's going to be all right. And it's a song that's been helpful at times when it's been difficult. When I was wee, as a teenager, and then as an adult. So it's something that, and again, there's a bit of a childlike quality to that song as well, so it makes you maybe think about childhood. So there were 3 songs that came to mind when you asked the question, Shug.
Both interesting tunes, really good tunes, and relevant, and I get why both these have suggested the music. And if we go back to what you were saying about the youth club, Johnny, because that's one of the places that Street Cones met yourself.
You did, aye.
Worked in collaboration with Aberlour Children's Trust.
Yeah.
Two of the projects that three of the projects that stick to mind is Storm Cookers.
Yep.
Where we worked with a young team on a 12-week period, prepared and cooked a meal for the pensioners for Christmas time.
Yep.
And also we were able to listen to the voices of the young team, and we went to residential to Strathire and to Belfast. So I think we've got a good understanding of how well Street Cones and Aberlour Children's Trust have worked together. But that was possible through the youth club. That was a place, and if we look at the UNCRC, the best interests of a child, in Article 12, the views. What would you think, both these, about youth clubs and the lack of them as well? What's your thoughts, John?
Well, for me, a youth club is vital. I mean, I think we've not got enough of them. We need more of them in the community. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And to me, a youth club is not just about activities. It's more than that. You know, it's a safe space. It's for people, young people, to come in. You know, there's a lot of kids out there at the moment who are struggling with their mental health. You know, there's addiction problems out there. They've got problems in the house. You know, it's just having a space there and support. You know, sometimes myself is the only person these young people will come to.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm the only person they've got, you know. So, I mean, it's so important, you know, and you get these young people coming through and there's just no ambition, they don't see a future, you know, they really don't, they're down, the self-esteem's, it's just one big struggle for them.
Yep.
And you know what, Shug, it might take the club, they might come through the club and it might take 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years before you get these kids back on their feet.
Yeah.
You know, but with the right support, and that, we can't do that unless we've got a youth club, because it's not a classroom, it's a safe space, it's a space that they can relate to, you know. And honestly, I can't, we need more youth clubs, honestly we do, you know. Yeah, definitely.
Totally not, and I get that, because I seen that myself, how safe a space it was for young people to come, have a voice, feel empowered, and when they got together, they were stronger with that sense of belonging, and they were able to talk to yourself and other workers. Julie was one of the ones who worked closely next to you as well.
Just a marvellous youth worker. She is just incredible.
Yep.
You know, honestly, it's again, you're talking about me here. You know, we worked as a team.
Aye.
You know, and it's a really good, successful team. And unfortunately, that's kind of Julie's went a different road, but she's still working, obviously,
Sure.
doing incredible work, very intensive unit. But no, it's to me. I mean, well, you know, my youth club got closed there. You know, which was it's devastating for me. Excuse me. It was devastating for me because there's young people now that won't be able to access the youth club.
Yep.
Because I'm having to move probably a mile and a half. Mile and a half to me, for some of these kids, it's another end of the other end of Glasgow for them. They just can't, they'll not get themselves there, you know. And that's kids who are needing their support. At this moment in time, we need their support. And I think we've let them down.
Yep.
You know, us as adults, closing youth facilities, I think we're letting them down. We're talking about children's rights. We're letting their rights down.
Yep.
We're doing that. So, yeah.
Look, I get that. What was your thoughts on it, Martin?
So I think it's, I think if we think about everything that Johnny's just said through a kind of children's rights, children's human rights lens, I think what the experience that we've had at Aberlour with the issue around the spaces where we would have our youth clubs and our youth centres closing and not being available, you know, that's effectively us putting up barriers to children being able to access their rights at a time when we're talking about incorporation of the UNCRC. And I think we need to really be quite thoughtful and to be able to challenge where we can to show and highlight that contradiction. So you talked there about some of the guiding principles there, Shug. You know, there's the best interests, children's right to life, survival and development, non-discrimination, and children's voices being heard. And the closure of youth clubs and youth centres and access to activities for young people, it's fundamentally contradictory to those guiding principles.
Sure,
you know, it's
definitely.
discriminatory against young people that can't access activities and opportunities elsewhere out their community. You know, it's not in the best interests of children and young people, because we know that having that access and that ability to network and build relationships and get involved in activities they might not otherwise have access to, it puts a barrier in place to that. We know our children and young people in Govan and elsewhere, right across Aberlour, are really clear about what they want and what they expect. And we're not listening to and responding to that when we're beginning to close and make decisions that ultimately mean youth work and youth centres can't continue. So I think it's a real challenge for us if we're committed to UNCRC, and it's not just that commitment is there. We now have a legal obligation as a country.
Totally.
You know, decision makers, policy makers, whether at a local level or a national level, they now are compelled to make interest in the best decisions of our children and young people. And youth work needs to be driven, and decisions around youth work need to be driven and guided by those fundamental children's rights and UNCRC principles. And the concern for us, I suppose, is, and Johnny mentioned it there about mental health, is it's no surprise that there's been a direct correlation over the last 10 years or more as a result of austerity and local government cuts, particularly, where we've seen a reduction in investment of youth work. There has been, and so as that has reduced, we have seen at the same time an increase in children and young people's mental health concerns,
Yep.
you know, poor mental health outcomes. And we know that if we take what we would call the social model of mental health through things like youth work and access to youth work, and folk like Johnny being able to make those connections and create spaces and opportunities and ensure that our young people can access activities, then that's part of how we support and promote good mental health for our children and young people. And if we take that away, it shouldn't be a surprise that children's and young people's mental health is maybe going to suffer. So I think there's some really fundamental concerns that the closure of youth work and youth centres really should prompt us to think about.
No, interesting, and you highlighted that, Martin, brilliant, mate. And what I'm thinking is, before they shut your youth centre in Govan, did anybody actually come in for Health and Social Care Partnership and ask and hear the views of the young people?
Well, this is a problem. Young people don't get heard. There's adults making decisions for young people without discussing with young people.
Yep.
You know, a youth club gets closed without discussion with the young people. You know, things like that. I think, to be honest with you, since the lockdown, you know, over 3 years, some of these kids have missed out.
Yep.
Basically, their mental health, and yet I'm now saying it's surfacing now. You can see the actual problems it's caused. You know, 3 years, some of them missed their schooling for 3 years, basically. You know, they're now out there trying to get a job. They don't, then they end up in crime. You know,
Yep.
So again, that's why the youth club is a place where if they're struggling on that side of it, job opportunities, Aberlour will help there.
Yep.
That's what we do. You know, but again, you take that away, you take that centre away. It's difficult.
And I think again, it's a really short-sighted approach that fails to recognise where youth work sits within that wider educational kind of environment for children and young people. You know, so UNCRC is really clear: children have rights on education, but they also have a right to a meaningful education that supports and promotes and nurtures their individual skills and talents and interests. And we know for some of our young people, particularly young people at Aberlour, where maybe they've experienced barriers to education, or the education system as it stands doesn't necessarily respond to what they need.
Yeah.
So youth work and access to the types of activities that Johnny and other youth work services can provide, it should be seen as part of that wider access to education that promotes and supports our young people's talents and interests. And as well as the fundamental right, Article 31, which says children have a right to play, to leisure activities.
Yep.
That's all in there.
Totally,
We're
totally.
talking about UNCRC, we're talking about incorporation, we're talking about what does implementation look like. We can't just be thinking about education very narrowly in a school setting. We can't be thinking about the right to play, and that only means our youngest children and access to parks. You know, we need to be thinking about what does that mean for all of our children, and bearing in mind UNCRC is for all children up to the age of 18. That includes our teenagers, that includes our young people. We need to think, what does that right to play and leisure activities mean? And for us at Aberlour, we're really clear that that means access to youth work. Johnny and the team in Govan and Glasgow, and we've got other youth work services around the country that are doing amazing work. But the problem is that that's in a really difficult landscape of ongoing reductions in youth work, investment in youth work. Aberlour have made a commitment to making sure we can do what we can to continue to deliver those services and provide that support and make sure our young people have the opportunities that they might otherwise not be able to access. But the problem is, it's in that really, really difficult landscape of reduced investment, and we can do what we can. But for those children outside of Aberlour, for those young people that don't necessarily have an Aberlour service or a youth club nearby, what does that mean? So there's thousands, many children and young people right across the country that simply aren't getting the access to the types of things they shouldn't just be able to expect, but fundamentally will get a right to.
I've been at Johnny's youth club, and I see a form of education within that is tailored for the individual. I've also seen healthcare, I've also seen safeguarding, I've also seen access to activities and other stuff that Johnny would put on that would help for personal development, creativity, and that right to play in the nurturing process. And Johnny, you've seen it yourself at first hand within the schools where young people only going to school.
No, Martin touched on it there for the education side. No, not every kid's going to be academic. Not everybody, they just don't fit school.
Yep.
And to be honest with you, I don't think the education, I don't think they cope well with it at all. Excuse me. There's still kids coming through the club who they'd no future, they thought they had no future, you know, no ambition, you know. And through the right support, we've got them into employment. I've got kids now that are joiners, plasterers, you know, kids that went to university. The school had written them off.
Yep.
They'd written them off. But through Aberlour being there for that support, we would have lost these kids. You know, we would have lost them. And there's still kids out there now that are getting lost.
Aye.
Because we're still going down the same old road.
Yep.
If it doesn't fit, they're out of school. You know, the amount of kids that you see during the day, I see the day, 14, 15, they're not at school. You know, that's a massive problem, because that's going to be our problem in the future.
Definitely.
Do you know?
Yep.
And we really need to be looking a wee bit more into kids who don't fit the education system as it stands at the moment.
And we need to be really clear about which kids it is we're talking about here.
Yep.
We're talking about our kids that are most likely and have grown up experiencing deep disadvantage. You know, kids grown up in poverty, in really, really challenging and difficult circumstances. The youth work and youth club and youth point in Glasgow and Aberlour, that's where they can access the types of activities. The only place in their community they might be able to nearby, they might be able to access the types of opportunities that Aberlour can provide, that Johnny and the team can deliver to enjoy the rights around access to leisure and play, but also to make those connections, to increase that network of peers and friendships and all that type of stuff. Without that, where do they go for that? And it's a fundamental, we need to think about it fundamentally in terms of where other children, maybe from more affluent backgrounds, communities, don't experience those barriers, because actually there's many more activities and opportunities that they might be able to access. Sometimes that'll cost money for their families, but if they can afford it, fair enough. But we're talking about children that they can't pay for access, they can't pay to travel halfway across the city, they can't pay for uniforms to go to those types of clubs and activities that might require it.
Sure.
You know, what we're providing is something locally in the community for those young people with their peers in that community space. And you remove that, and you're then removing a lot of the opportunities, and it can fundamentally lead to some of the things that Johnny's mentioned there. It becomes some of the things that might happen in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And basically what it is there's poverty. There's poverty there, you know, and unfortunately there's kids that just can't afford everyday necessities.
Yeah.
They just don't, you know. And it's people. A lot of people out there don't really understand the poverty is in some of these communities.
We're sitting in the West End, Johnny, right, in a place that some people would say is you haves, the Govan, some people would say have-nots. I was reading a really interesting article by Glasgow University that tells you own life expectancy, right? Mm-hmm. And also how much investment goes in to communities. And my experiences of doing work in Govan, there's a lot of investment that goes into Govan. Mm-hmm. So for me to try to understand one of these community assets, youth club, that's so important for young people to participate. Why do people not come who have got the powers, but that hierarchy, who's people that sit up there, they're looking down there, why do they not come to the club or to the area, listen to boots on the ground like yourself, who has got a first-hand experience, and sit with the Waynes and turn around and say, we're the policy makers here. Mm-hmm. How can we make it child-friendly for yourselves to participate, so whatever happens in the community, you have got a buy-in? Mm-hmm.
It's the powers that be. Excuse me. I mean, and Govan alone, Govan is a great place to work. People are absolutely marvellous. Proud people. Yeah. Very, very proud. You know, they've got their social problems. And Govan, absolutely. They're not alone there. You know, there's a lot of areas in Glasgow have got very, very, very similar problems. But to me, it's like everything else. To me, you get SNP in there for a number of years. We're going to have Labour in for a number of years. I just think through the years, nothing's really changed.
Sure.
Nothing's really changed. You're talking about investment coming into Govan. You know, is it going to benefit the Govan people? I'm not so sure about that. I'm not really so sure about that. But that's another issue.
Does it benefit, on that note, and does it benefit the people who parachute in to Govan rather than invest in the people in Govan to support the people of Govan? Does that make sense?
I don't want to get into the political side of it, but I think that people do parachute in and out as soon as if there's investment in there, certain people come in where the investment is. Yep. And it might not always be the benefit for the Govan people.
Yep. So that takes us into your end of the spectrum in policy, Martin, policy. Yep. How does, first of all, has children been involved in policy influence and writing? If Aberlour got a chunk of money that goes into Govan, are the young people consulted to see where it goes, mate? You know, to see where they want to spend? How does policy, because for me, try to understand this word policy, writing, and children's views being taken seriously within the policy. You're the man to ask that.
Okay, I'll try and answer that. So first of all, let me talk about Aberlour. Right. I think that's important to highlight. I think we certainly are, we're a children's rights champion organisation. You know, long before UNCRC incorporation, Aberlour always been trying to work in a children's rights informed way. That's part of our wider commitment to a human rights approach, recognising our children, young people, but also our families, parents, carers and others. And have championed and been part of that campaign to see UNCRC happen in Scotland. So that commitment is embedded and very deep-seated in Aberlour. How does that reflected and how is that visible? So Article 12 is really important to us as an organisation, important to me in my role and the work that I do and my team, and that's all about how we elevate and amplify the voices of our children and young people at Aberlour in order to inform and influence what we do as an organisation. So how we go about our business and how we think about what our priorities should be, make sure we're making the right decisions alongside our children, young people and families, about our services, what our communities that we're working in are looking for. So voice is absolutely central to that. Voice is the absolute fulcrum of how we make sure we are representing effectively and authentically what our children, young people and families tell us, their voices, their views and their experiences. And I think we've got a pretty good culture of doing that in Aberlour. And that does extend to making sure we are making decisions alongside our children and young people about how we are targeting investment, about how about making sure that what services we're delivering even with those services that are being delivered on behalf of local authorities often, because that's where a lot of our services funding comes from, that those services are designed alongside our children and young people and our families, that collaborative and what we would call a kind of co-design approach. So that's kind of built into Aberlour, and I think we've got a pretty good culture and can illustrate that pretty well. And that also feeds into what Aberlour is saying in terms of our lobbying and influencing and kind of campaigning activity. Again, you know, that's part of my role in the organisation, and talking to our politicians and Scottish Government and others, and making sure that everything that Aberlour is saying to try and make progress and influence positive change on behalf of our children, families and the communities we work in. But that isn't just us saying because that's what we think is the right thing. We're saying that on behalf of our children. We're representing their voices. And actually, more effectively, we're doing everything we can to create those spaces and places and opportunities where our children and young people and families feel confident to stand up and speak up for themselves. And that's, for me, that's the most effective way we can go about our work. It's not about Aberlour saying what we think is right because we're an expert as an organisation. It's about making sure we're doing everything we can to put the scaffolding in place that our children and young people can stand up and speak up for themselves. And I think that's the most powerful thing that we can do to help to influence. And we do see evidence of it influencing. In the wider context, in terms of Scotland, I think we've got some really good examples of children and young people across the board being able to effectively influence at a kind of policy and legislative level. And I think the UNCRC is a really good example of that. That campaign was led in many ways by children and young people. Many who were children at the start, and by the time the legislation became law, had become adults. But nonetheless, there's an incredible community of children and young people right across Scotland who had campaigned and lobbied relentlessly and were part of that UNCRC incorporation campaign. And that's been a really incredible and empowering thing to see. And I hope for other children and young people, maybe those that are children now, looking at that, they can see and feel empowered by what can be achieved by children and young people. However, I still think as a country, we've got a long, long way to go. And too often, policy decisions are made, policy is made, legislation is made that doesn't reflect adequately the voices and views and experiences of children, young people and families. That's what UNCRC is about. And we're at the start of that journey, I suppose. We've had the journey to get to pass the legislation was part one. Part two now, the next stage, is how do we put that into practice? I think we've got great ambition. We've got really warm words. We've got lots of politicians and policymakers saying all the right things. But too often, I think in Scotland, we've seen where there has been a failure to take those warm words, to take that policy ambition and to actually put it into practice effectively, what we might sometimes call the implementation gap. And as an organisation that's campaigned and champions the UNCRC, I think we're keen to do everything we can, and we know there's many others out there who feel the same about making sure we don't fall into that implementation gap issue again with this, and we're doing everything we can to avoid that. But it's true to say that past experience tells us that we need to be really, really thoughtful about what UNCRC implementation looks like. So I think maybe in answer to your question, I think we've got really good examples of where children and young people's voices have been able to influence policy and progress in Scotland for the benefit of children and young people. But I think we've got a long, long way to go. And I think what's really clear for us as an organisation who mostly supports or works with children and young people who face and experience disadvantage, barriers to realising their rights, children and young people who have experienced deep poverty and inequality, they're the children and young people who are furthest away from power. They're the children and young people who are furthest away from being able to influence decision making. And we need to be really clear that UNCRC is universal and it means all of our children. And so I suppose we see it as our job and our role to make sure we're doing what we can to amplify and elevate the voices of those children and young people that are furthest away from decision making and power, so that they can have an influence. Because otherwise UNCRC doesn't provide that level of equity for children and young people right across Scotland.
I'm so sorry, Shug. I particularly see that with some of the young people who are seeking asylum. I'm working with at the moment.
Culture difference,
but I'd say some of their children's rights, it's not happening. You know, and to me, if any children at all that come into Scotland, any at all, they should have the same rights as every other children in Scotland. At the moment, I don't see that. I see barriers there. I see it on a day-to-day basis, you know, and it's quite sad.
What barriers do you see, Johnny?
I see barriers to work, for instance, education, access to some of the medical stuff that we've got here, and housing. Housing. I mean, there's young people, and I know in particular, one case, a young person being housed with adults and leading to abuse. That should never happen. Never happen. Yeah, it does. You know, so again, we can talk about children's rights, but it's good that ideal having it all down in paper and saying, right, this is what we're going to do, and we need to act on it.
Definitely. And
we need to act on it.
We've got to act on it, but where I see there could be wee tweaks, Martin, wee changes, is to have the UNCRC as a framework for all policy. So what happens then is if a children or a young person who isn't aware of their rights, who isn't empowered to have a voice, the policy is structured to uphold rights. So whether you're aware of them or whether you're empowered to ask for them, the policy there protects your rights. For that reason, because the UNCRC, when the consensus, there was always a debate between culture, right, and internet now, which we've seen about how misinformation can be there. And I know that the demographics of Govan have changed, and maybe the younger people who are coming to the youth club.
It's not cultural now. Absolutely.
So the UNCRC, for the culture of different young people, has to give you the same kind of rights. So what I'm trying to find out about is the club itself. Surely that breaks down all these barriers. It lets other people understand different cultures. It breaks down barriers and brings people united together, but also a sense of belonging, which is key.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's young people that come into the club don't speak English. You know, how hard is it for these young people to come through that door? They don't speak English. And I'll tell you, after a couple of weeks, couple of months, these kids are just any other kid.
Yeah.
You know, having fun, they mix, they socialise together.
Growing and developing.
I mean, they grow up. I mean, there's been kids for a number of years now, and now they're employed. You know, we've managed to get them into employment. You know, some of them are tradesmen now. They're driving their cars, and it's great to see, because I remember these kids coming through the door and they couldn't even speak English. So again, without Aberlour being there,
you
know, that's another different avenue. You know, when we're talking about kids that came into the country, you know, seeking asylum and whatever, and without our support, it could be a lonely time.
Yep.
You know, because some of these kids have, as we all know, they come with their stories that are horrific. So you know what I mean? And we're the only support sometimes that these kids have got. You know. Yep. And we've got a great, there's, apart from, Youth Point, there's the guardianship within Aberlour, you know what I mean, they support these kids, they do a marvellous job. So, yeah, I think we've got a long way to go when we're talking about children's rights regarding
for asylum seeking and refugee children. I think the point that Johnny makes there about, it's another element it's another really important part of why the youth club and youth work in Govan is so important. Because within the youth club itself, within Youth Point Glasgow, you see that incredible diversity that reflects the community as it is now in Govan.
Yep.
And for those young people, it's breaking down barriers, it's making connections, it's building relationships, it's promoting and celebrating the diversity of the community within Govan, amongst those young people. And we see that in Glasgow, and we see it in other parts of Scotland where we're working, where we have that real diversity within the communities that we're working in. And you take that away, and that space that's been there that can act as that space where people can mix and come together that might not otherwise get the opportunity to.
100%.
You remove it.
Yeah.
And immediately you begin then to then put barriers back up in terms of the community, in terms of people being able to make connections. So it's so important.
So important, because look at what's happening down south, the riots that are happening down there. Do you know what I mean? And that's getting a bit the racial tension down there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You get kids that when they're young, going through a club, they grow up together, you know. You're breaking down these barriers.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
And
I think we're putting barriers up there.
Aye.
You know, we're closing youth clubs.
I'll give you a really good example, Chuck, of just how important that is. So at Aberlour, as I said before, we've made a real commitment to youth work. We know it's a really important bit of what we do, and the absence of activities or access to activities that our young people might have otherwise. And so Aberlour has made this really important commitment to youth work right across the organisation, right across Scotland. One of the things we do is we have an event every year called AbJam, and it's nearly 10 years, Johnny. I mean,
Already?
We've been doing this, but it's a residential. It's a weekend residential. The important thing for us, though, is that it's for our young people to plan, and they're part. They own it.
Yeah.
You know, they've got total ownership over this as an event. So from the outset, we've got a group of our young people from right across the country who come together, and they spend months planning it, and they work out the agenda, and they have all sorts of things, workshops that our young people will then kind of deliver about things that are interesting to them, to connect with other young people. It's a really amazing experience of bringing young people from all over the country together in one space over the weekend, and they have all sorts of fun activities, and they're learning, and they're, you know, it's somewhere where they can come together to meet, to learn, to share, and to have fun, most importantly. And we often have young people from our guardianship service there, so that's unaccompanied young people who arrive in Scotland alone under the age of 18, and they're supported by our guardianship service. Often those that have got limited English, if any English at all, and usually at some point over the weekend you get some kind of disco or activity, you know, just something really fun that kids can get involved in and enjoy themselves. And often for some of those kids, you see that it's the first time they've maybe had the chance to be a kid for a long time, and they're just connecting with their peers, and there's a diversity of the young people that are there, and some of them might not even speak English, but they're just connecting. They're on a really fundamental level because they're having fun and they're enjoying themselves.
Being children.
Being children.
Just having a good time, having fun.
Absence of that, and too much of what is happening, I think, now, for too long in Scotland, for those children and young people, the ones that I mentioned before, who are furthest away from power and influence and decision maker, and making the ones who experience disadvantage, who are grown up in poverty, who come from
children that come into your club.
Children that come into our club.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That aspect of childhood has been removed.
Yep. The right to play.
The right to play, just to be children.
Yep.
And the sad fact is, a lot of these kids have lost their childhood through the traumas they've been through getting to this country.
Yep.
You know, and they really need a lot of support.
Trauma.
You know, AbJam is absolutely marvellous for that. You know, it's a really great example for that.
Yep. But we talk about trauma and kids that come into the country, but we've also got kids who were born here, who live here, who are suffering traumatic experiences and need that support that's no the identity of school, social work, police. It's somebody independent, which we've done residentials together. Me and you have stood and looked at each other and had to have a chuckle at some of the things, but we understood the behaviour and how to soothe and how to support that and be trauma responsive, mate, to be trauma responsive. And when children come into the club, I've seen your skills, mate, and what you do to make them feel welcome and at ease, and how you support that trauma. Do you want to go into a wee bit more depth about that?
It's building relationships up, mate. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen overnight, you know. You've just got to chip away at it. You know, a kid will come, he might be aggressive. You know, basically I put ground rules down. When you come into our club, it's ground rules, you know, and because I'm getting kids from all different backgrounds, and they'll come with aggressive. They're aggressive for a reason. You know, their upbringing, you know, what's happening in their own house, you know, and you've got to understand that. You know, you can't just exclude somebody for being. You've got to, you know, work with it. You know, and it takes time. You know, but you do. And again, it's about building these relationships up. You've got to build it. It's key, mate. It's key. And being consistent. You've got to be consistent with it.
No parachuted in and parachuted back out, mate.
No, you can't. You know.
Yep.
Will I get let down at times? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So, but that's all part of being a youth worker. That's what happens,
Totally.
you know. And again, you chip away at it and you get a result. You will get a result at the end of it. You know, you definitely do. And there's nothing better when you see a kid that's come in, you know, troubled, it's lost, you know, and you see him, you know, just leaving the club, you know, as a teenager, you know, and just going on, you know.
Growing.
Oh, it's just that's it. It's just, and it's amazing what a job does. Particularly these kids who have people been written off.
Yeah.
See, when they're written off and they get a full-time employment, and they'll come back into the club. I mean, I've getting young people come back into the club and they're in their 30s. You know, they're parents. You know, and it's just marvellous. I mean that the article in the paper yesterday. I mean, that was a young lad that came through the club, and I put a medical. It was a first aid course I'd put on, and we're doing the first aid course, and this young lad just everything that was getting shown. I'm going. He was a doctor, you know. He was that good, you know. I'm saying. So I happened to say to him, I said, "How are you so good at first aid?"
Yeah.
He said, "I do a lot of karate. We've done first aid in my karate club." I said, "Yeah, any good?" He went, "I'm a world champion."
Wow.
I went,
You're kidding.
yeah, this one, I had to laugh, you know what I mean? So I said, and I just dismissed it, you know. Then I said to him, his wee mate, I said, "Does he play karate?" He said, "Oh, he's a world champion. He won the world championship in Manchester."
Wow.
And I went, so I spoke to him, and then it came out that he was got to defend it in Japan, his title, but he couldn't go because he didn't have finances to do it.
Oh.
So I said, "Right, this boy must get the opportunity to do this," you know. So we chopped a few doors, got a few sponsors.
Amazing, mate.
And we managed to get him and his dad over to Japan.
Well done. Well done, Paul.
And he defended his title. That young lad still comes into me. He's a family now, he's 32, he's a karate instructor.
See, that's what it's all about, mate.
I mean, that's what keeps you going. You know what I mean? Because that's a success story. That is one of the success stories it's just nice.
See, the legacy of youth work.
Yeah,
the impact it has in people's lives, the long-term effect it can have, a positive way in which it can help shape and guide a young person in their decision-making to have, you know, a really fulfilling life. And it all comes from being able to come to the youth club.
Yeah. And then come back to see you.
Yeah. Come back to see you.
And that young lad always said, he said, "I wasn't going to come into the club that night."
And it just that changes.
It's just a thing.
See, he says there also, I remember when we were in Govan together working, and we used to highlight the assistance and need for family to be a unit, right? And the UNCRC protects that. Do you think that's going to make a difference to families in the communities that you work in? Is that, like, for example, is that something that you see that will make housing, access to decent adequate housing that is needed, other support to understand kids' mental health, behaviour? What do you think, Martin?
I think probably Martin there too.
So I think it's a really important point to note that the UNCRC itself, as a document, mentions families and parents more than it mentions children. And it's really clear about the importance of family and a family unit and supporting that family unit as the main mechanism through which you can support and promote and protect children's rights.
Yep.
Article 18 is really clear about the duty on the state to make sure that it is putting in place all the things that families need and parents need to support them to be the main carers and to be responsible, to be able to be responsible and provide the support and care for their children growing up. Article 26 and 27 are also clear about the role of the state in making sure that financial support is available for families, addressing poverty and disadvantage, housing, food and quality of life are protected and supported and promoted. That all sits within the UNCRC. Yep. Effectively what the UNCRC is saying in that through that is children have the right to grow up free from poverty, and the state has a role to make sure that it's supporting families to enable that to happen. So UNCRC is really clear about families,
Yep.
about parents.
Yep.
Children's rights are families' rights. Families' rights are children's rights. You know, you can't think of them as being separate in some way.
Totally.
You know, so providing adequate housing, providing financial support, providing the other types of practical supports and access to services and public services that families need in order that their children can have a quality of life and to grow up in, as the UNCRC says, that atmosphere of love, happiness and understanding. You know, there's a role, there's an obligation, not just a role, there's an obligation, a duty on the state to make that happen. So our commitment to support as a country, our commitment to respecting, protecting and fulfilling children's rights has to be seen through the context of how we support families in order to make sure that happens for our children.
Will that be in policy then? For example, the way you've just highlighted there, does that get written into policy now to make sure that it does harm, or is that a difficult one? And how does it, because policy itself, right, and the UNCRC is great for a framework for policy, but to embed it in now into policy and practice, how does it look? And also, can it change culture, thinking?
So I suppose there's two bits to that, Shug. So first of all, about how it's reflecting the policy. So the purpose is, as a legal framework, it now insists there's legal duties on the state. So all policy and legislation now produced through the Scottish Parliament has to be cognizant of that. It has to reflect those duties on the state. So in theory, we should begin to see policy and legislation from here on in, as a result of incorporation, reflect children's rights as a fundamental in terms of the policy development. That'll happen through things like children's rights impact assessments, that there's a duty and an obligation now for government and policymakers to undertake to make sure that new policy and new legislation is consistent with UNCRC. So that's, in theory, is how it should work. I'll maybe reflect back on my previous answer about the implementation camp.
Yeah.
You know, that's where I suppose myself and others in positions like me and organisations like Aberlour will continue to lobby and campaign and to hold government to account.
Yeah, good.
But there's also mechanisms by which, built into the UNCRC, by which that accountability can be progressed. So where breaches of children's rights continue, where things happen that are inconsistent or incompatible with children's rights because of decision making and policy making, you know, there are mechanisms now around remedy and redress. But coming on to the second bit of your question about culture. Hi there. How you doing?
There's another guest for the bench.
Another guest for the bench, yeah.
Yeah, pal.
But coming on to your second bit of that question about culture, fundamentally, what we hope is that the UNCRC will act, and the duties contained will act as a way of helping to shift and change culture so that those mechanisms around remedy and redress aren't necessarily required. Mm-hmm. I mean, what it does mean is ultimately children now have the right to be able to bring a legal challenge to
local courts,
where they see their rights have been breached, or those on behalf of children can now bring legal challenge. And we'll likely see that in the future.
Will Aberlour support that legal challenge? Is that something that's...
Well, you know, that's built into, that's children now have a right for that to be one mechanism by which they aim to address that rights breach, or those rights breaches that might happen. But before we even get there, what I suppose we want to be able to do is make sure the UNCRC acts as that method of being able to change people's approach, to shift and drive that culture around being children's rights informed at all points, that children's rights and UNCRC are your starting point for how you develop policy and how you make decisions. Mm-hmm. And that's from, you know, local government right up to Scottish government around things like budget. So Scotland's budget on it, you know, as that's, you know, as the work around that is happening year on year, it should be the case now that civil servants and ministers and others are taking a children's rights informed view to budget setting. So in terms of what we're allocating for investment in services and housing, you know, how is that consistent with our commitments to children's rights? You would hope and expect, therefore, that there's a level of thinking around tackling the housing emergency right now, reducing the number of children, eradicating, making sure that no child is growing up in temporary housing or is homeless. That should be built in now to the decision-making process and decisions around investment and budgeting. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's about addressing the culture. But what the UNCRC does is, even when that cultural shift doesn't happen, or doesn't go far enough, is that there's mechanisms built in now around that legal, because it's a legal framework. That legal accountability is there, and that can be challenged. And children and young people, or those organisations that support children and young people, can use that legal challenge in order to address breaches of children's rights.
So maybe when did the club get pulled in, Johnny?
2 months ago.
2 months ago, right? So if the decision was being made to pull the club down now, children's rights would probably prevent that from going down now.
Would have.
Would it? What do you think?
I'm not too sure about that. It's all right, again, we're having the children's rights in paper, article this and article that. It's going to get implemented. It's going to, again, I'll go back to, there's probably 1 billion children not getting access to drinking water.
Right.
Healthcare. Food. Shelter.
Yeah.
Safety.
Living for, I mean, that's his worldwide. But we're not just talking about Scotland, we're talking about worldwide here. 1 billion children.
So the numbers.
It's a lot. But again, I mean, we've got to start somewhere. I think Scotland, I think we've shown the way. I think
Scotland's definitely shown the way.
I think there's progress being made, and I think in some ways we can say, we hopefully do provide, a beacon, or we are a beacon in some ways for others.
Unique. We're unique.
Who are saying, look at a country like Scotland that can take UNCRC and not just have that commitment. So 196 countries around the world right now have made the commitment, have effectively signed up to the UNCRC, but not many of them have actually taken that commitment and then incorporated it into their own domestic law, so that then it has the legal effect. So Scotland is one of the few that's done that, and that should be celebrated and recognised. But one of the things I think Johnny and I were talking about earlier on was about that fine balance. So the decision around the youth club, I think, has also been taken in within the context of the amount of space that's necessary and available in the community to build social housing. So that's a difficult trade-off, obviously. And
it is a balance. It definitely is a balance.
Fully support the need of social housing, and that will help to address, in many ways, the housing emergency, and hopefully, as a result, reduce the number of children living in temporary housing. So not wanting to point the finger at policymakers and say you're getting it wrong all the time. People have a difficult balance in order to get right. And there might be a perspective that says, youth work's really important, and we continue to commit to that, but we also need to come good in our commitments around making available, accessible, safe and secure social housing for families that can't currently access it. So there's going to be a difficult question.
Different choices there.
Well, but it certainly is, because, I remember, I grew up in Drumchapel. When Drumchapel was opened at first, they were...
The drum, Johnny.
The drum, the drum, and there were nothing in it. There were houses.
Shops, nothing.
That was it. Space, and the green space, youth club was no way, So, it's absolutely, social housing, particularly in places like Govan, they're desperate. They're desperate for housing. But again, you can't just social. There's, as you quite rightly said, we need a balance. You need
community planning, mate.
You need community. You definitely do, because if you've not got community clubs or community hubs or whatever you want to call them, you'll not have a community.
And I remember when I was dogging school, mate. I would dog school, but I still go to the youth club.
Aye.
Right, I still go to the youth centre where I went in, and I felt I belong in here, right? And the youth workers were brand new. They would sit, talk to us, no judges, and we'd always ask how we were and different things. And I remember at that time there was different communities and there was tension. And by going to the youth club, it broke away that tension. And we ended up saying, rather than fight with each other, we play football with each other. Or we go in residentials with each other. It broke down all the barriers.
Breaking down barriers, the intergenerational work we've done, within the club. Christmas hampers for the elderly. We've done a Burns night. I think last year was our 10th Burns night we've done. that was young people led, you know what I mean, they served the food and entertainment. I mean, incredible. And the barriers that broke down, you know, people stayed up the same close as some of these young people who never spoke to each other. No, and I'm being serious. And the barriers that broke down was incredible, you know, and that was held within the youth club. Now, I'm hoping we're going to find somewhere next year to continue that. I really do.
There was something stuck in my mind, Mark, before just 2 seconds, buddy, right? We'll highlight what you're saying there. I remember the Stormcookers when one of the young team put Christmas dinner down to one of the pensioners, right? And they started to talk to the pensioner, and she went, I know you, right? And she explained that when she was coming home at night time, she was intimidated by them standing at the corner, right?
Yeah.
And by listening to each other, how they were feeling, the wee man got it. He got it, right? Yeah. And he says, next time, missus, I'll carry your shopping up the road for you. And that was...
That's how easy it is, you know, it's... But again, you've got to be consistent with it, you know. Yeah, I mean, sorry.
what I was going to say was, I think the intergenerational work, you know, the burn suppers, the promoting and celebrating the diversity within the community and the breaking down barriers and the making connections between young people from different backgrounds and different cultures and different race and religions. To me, what that speaks to is the power of youth work. Is the power of youth work as a force for good, as a positive force within communities. And I think that sits as a really, really important contrast to what we hear relentlessly in the media, and too often the narrative around young people is around antisocial behaviour.
Yep.
Young people who have got no interest in anybody else, young people that are just, you know, they've disconnected, or they're just on their phones, or they've got no worthwhile contribution to make. And I think I would push back against that. And I think what's really, really important is to reflect the fact that the young people we're talking about are young people that have had more barriers put up in their lives than most others. The young people that have encountered and experienced the greatest number of challenges and biggest amount of adversity in their lives, and multiple adversities. And yet there's so many examples that we can share, the work that Johnny does, and the work in Glasgow and Govan, and the young people that Johnny works with, of how much of a galvanising and really positive force for good youth work and bringing those young people together is, and the contribution and the difference they can make in their communities for their own benefit and for the community's benefit. And I think that's something that doesn't get celebrated or talked about.
No, it doesn't. And hopefully by doing a podcast that we've done, inviting yourself, Martin and Johnny, boots on the ground, right? Boots on the ground, and a man who's got the power. A man who's writing policy, right? So this is what we need. We need the policy writers, and we need the boots on the ground together, right? Because that's where we can make wee changes, we can tweak, right? Because for me, inclusion is prevention, right? Inclusion is prevention. And at the earliest opportunity is within youth clubs, where we can identify welfare needs. And we go way back to the 60s when the Kilbrandon report was first commissioned. And at that time, the needs, welfare, family, things that we've just spoken about, was highlighted in the 60s that led to different bits of legislation, Social Work Scotland Act, you know what I mean, Children's Hearing System, you know, so that document itself, timeless, you know. And we've just touched on some of the issues highlighted then. We're hearing it now. Okay, the implementation happens, but I'm hoping that you find a new place, mate, because I'd love to come back and work alongside you, right? For the good work we do. We're hoping this man here,
let's make it happen,
can do the tweaking, right? And say it's your fault, it's that person's fault, but bring everybody together collectively who's got a good idea, innovation. Let's be inventive, let's be Scottish, you know, let's get good stuff out. And it's going to take everybody to sit around the park bench, the table, and always say, forget what's happened in the past.
Blame culture's blame culture's not going to help.
No, it's what tomorrow, what we can do tomorrow and today. That's the key to it, mate. Yep. Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Brilliant. What do you think of the bench? What do you think of the spot?
I like the pipes coming in there as well.
They've got the pipes, everything here.
That's amazing.
Compared to...
Was that planned, Shuggy?
No,
right at the end
I
of
actually invited him along today, right? But to sit here, right?
That's amazing.
It's an inspiring place as well, because you get university there, right? And I think Kelvingrove Park, I've been in a lot of other parks in the city, and I see Kelvingrove Park is it's got different, how can I put it, different feel, different soul, different heart, but all parks should be the same, right? And Elder Park, for example, I was in it recently. What a great space it could be with a bit more investment.
Yep.
And maybe a youth club in the park, somewhere where you've got that trauma responsive environment where you can get into, but rather than a breakaway room, you've got a breakaway environment. So maybe something that we could champion for in due course.
For the future.
Hope, Johnny.
Hope.
I'm hopeful.
I'm hopeful that there's going to be change and advocacy. Surely we should be able to advocate for the young team and get them what they need and what they want.
Times are changing.
Times changing. Guys, thank you.
Pleasure.
Mark, brilliant. Well done, guys. Nice to get a chat.
Right.
Perfect. That's what's got.